Have you ever walked through a movie theater in Canada and thought to yourself, wow, none of these films are Canadian? Well, if you're a film nerd like me, then probably. But what even is Canadian film? The federal government has been trying to figure that out for years, constantly asking itself, what is Canadian content? Is it the writer, director, producer that makes it Canadian? A show like The Handmaid's Tale, which is written by Canadian icon Margaret Atwood, wouldn't officially fit this criteria. Neither would Dune, directed by Quebec's Denis Villeneuve, or Turning Red, which takes place in Toronto but is produced and distributed by Disney and Pixar. This has been a problem in our industry forever. They call it CanCon, and it's kind of annoying. Senate recently released an amendment to the Broadcasting Act called Bill C-11, which gets streaming services to pay into and promote CanCon. And while it might have a pretty positive impact, it's been kind of controversial. Key figures in the industry are worried that it holds Canadian media outlets to much higher standards than these foreign streamers, and that they can circumvent our labor laws when it comes to employing Canadians. But again, no one even agrees on the bill's definition of CanCon. That deserves a whole episode all on its own. But Bill C-11 mostly concerns streaming services and the internet. What I'd like to know is where this energy was when it comes to theaters. Like I said, I'm not seeing a lot of CanCon there. What I'd like to draw this debate towards is a crisis in what has been dubbed the invisible art of filmmaking. The filmmaking process has to go through multiple stages to get to the point where you, a regular Joe, are watching a movie at the multiplex. We know about the production stage, but the final two stages are potentially the most important for getting a film onto people's screens and into their hearts. That is distribution and exhibition. Film distribution has long been called the invisible art because the general public tends to be unaware of it. Traditionally, distributors are the people who go to the film festivals, bid on the most financially viable films, and then handle the marketing and release of the film. This is where the exhibitors come in. Distributors distribute to cinemas, who then curate the experience of watching a film, the atmosphere, the food, the overall vibes. Distribution and exhibition are undergoing a bit of a crisis right now in Canada. A few things have happened all at once. In June of last year, Entertainment One of Canada's leading distribution companies, announced that it was ceasing operations of film distribution in Canada. And the worst part is, this isn't shocking. E1 has been a big fish in the Canadian pond for a long time, gobbling up much smaller, beloved fish. The pattern of Canadian distributors folding to bigger Canadian distributors and then even bigger American ones has been a problem in Canada for decades. While this seems like a classic game of big business, it's had major implications for Canadian filmmaking. With an ever-shrinking group of Canadian-owned film distributors who have crossed the threshold into international success, there aren't enough people buying up and distributing Canadian film. There have, of course, been attempts to correct this. In 1987, a proposal was tabled to stimulate competition among Canadian distributors, giving them exclusivity when it came to bidding for independently produced films in Canada. But this was lobbied against by both Canada and the US, and it quickly crumbled. In 1988, a policy was introduced which prohibited Canadian-owned distributors to be taken over by foreign companies unless those companies actively invested into Canada's cultural industries. But since any distributors, the biggest ones, who had already entered Canada before it was passed, didn't have to oblige, the bill was almost laughably useless. And it only seems to have gotten worse. A 2018 report revealed that the total distribution revenue of non-Canadian production is more than 5 times greater than the total distribution of Canadian production. This is blamed partly on Canadian tastes, but mostly on the ongoing encroachment of foreign distributors on the Canadian market. The report found that foreign distributors sticking their noses into our market limits choices for Canadian consumers, which results in fewer opportunities for theatrical release, or theatrical windows, as they put it. And that theatrical window gets even smaller when our biggest theaters are constantly favoring American distributors. It all came to a head in 2005 when Cineplex Odeon acquired Famous Players, giving them a virtual monopoly over film exhibition in Canada. As of now, Cineplex has a share of about 75% of the Canadian exhibition market. That is absolutely wild.
Everyone is having the same reaction for it. I think there actually is a lot of enthusiasm here in Canada for it because it's like about Canadian high schools, and it feels like a very local story. But I'd say, like, in terms of distribution, it's actually been championed more, in my opinion, in the States, just because I think there are just more art house theaters in America. There aren't many here in Canada. It's just hard. So our movie doesn't have like a theatrical run in Canada, which is odd, but it does have it in America. But then when you look at the theaters it's playing, it's like, wow, there are so many art house cinemas in New York. It's insane.
Cineplex has a ridiculous amount of control over when independent theaters can access new films, especially commercially popular ones. And we didn't think it was possible, but they might be tightening their grip even more. Usually exhibitors buy films from distributors to release them in theaters, right? But recently, Cineplex made a distribution agreement with Lionsgate, which sounds nice and all, but the problem is that they completely pushed out Mongrel Media, which alongside other big guys like Elevation Pictures, is one of the few big Canadian-owned distributors still around. Mongrel had originally been part of this agreement, being the middleman between Lionsgate and Cineplex. And not only have they been erased from the equation, but there's now a conflict of interest where if Cineplex becomes a distributor too, they're gonna become a leading supplier of films for independent theaters. And as Sonia William, director of the Network of Independent Canadian Exhibitors, puts it, does that sound like a fair marketplace? The CAFD also has something to say about this. They said the deal will result in a less competitive theatrical environment with reduced consumer movie choice overall and fewer Canadian films in particular, as self-dealing will take precedence over market interest. So as much as the government has tried to step in and help, it seems we keep running into the same issues over and over again. As our major homegrown distributors disappear by the year, it becomes harder and harder for Canadian films to get a competitive marketing budget, which means not only are they being erased from the international stage, they're being erased on a national one too. I think what we need is a Canadian A24, or AA24, am I right? To come in here and save the day. Barry Hertz of the Globe and Mail sees potential in newer indie distributors like Level Film and Game Theory Films, who have been coming out with a whole swath of great homegrown movies. I think he's right. The Canadian film industry has had trouble getting a foot into what is an incredibly competitive market, and it just gets undermined by foreign players at every turn. And nowhere is this more painfully clear than in the final stage of the process, where we're walking through theaters and there isn't a sign of Canadian filmmaking to be seen. Our filmmakers need their day in the light. They need to see themselves on the big screen.